types of motor neurons. Alright, so you remember the last page was about the cranial nerves, and I would like you to think about when we talked about motor, we always said it was either one kind or the other in the cranial nerves. Do you remember? They were always either somatic, we'll label this one somatic, or parasympathetic. You can use a green pen for parasympathetic, and it's actually this one. I'll tell you why in a little bit. So the cranial nerves, any motor output is either to a skeletal muscle or to a target, and it will have a rest and digest effect on it. The third kind of motor neuron in your body is a sympathetic. Okay, remember that the reason it got named a sympathetic is because, 1,000 years ago, sympathy meant to have strong emotion for something, and when you are in fight or flight, you're very aroused, right? Like, brr. And so that's why it was called the sympathetic nervous system. And parasympathetic was given for its anatomy, because para means beside the sympathetic, and if you think of an animal that's on all fours, the cranium and the sacral region is beside the torso, which is where the sympathetic fibers come from. So another name for the sympathetic nervous system is the thoracolumbar, because that's where the fibers arise. And another name for the parasympathetic division is the craniosacral division. So both of these are autonomic, right? And somatic is voluntary. All right, now we'll look at them one by one. So somatic nerves can be found, as you know already from the page we just did, in the cranial nerves. Not in all of them, though, right? If you were going to look back at that page, you would be able to, if I were to look at it right now in my notes, and I could say, okay, there is somatic. You might want to follow along here. There is somatic in number 1. No, because that's purely sensory, right? The first two are purely sensory. So cranial nerve number 3, though, has some somatic, and number 4, and number 5, and number 6, and number 7. 8 does not, though, right? So you could say 3 through 7, and then not 8, but then 9. 10 actually doesn't. 11 and 12 do. So 9, 11, and 12. So all of those different cranial nerves carry somatic fibers to move a skeletal muscle. And then every single one of the 31 pairs of spinal nerves do. And thanks to the hard work of these nerves, you can move the over 600 muscles, skeletal muscles that you have in your body. Skeletal muscles get their signals fast, and that's why it may not surprise you that somatic neurons are heavily myelinated. Let's put yellow on this long fiber to represent the heavy myelination that these axons have. So nerves are very white. They are white matter. And I'm going to use orange to talk about this myelination. So heavy myelination fast. And it also means that this is white matter that you would be looking at if you were to dissect it. Okay, now let's go to the target. What is the target of a somatic motor fiber? I'm going to keep using blue down here. The target's skeletal muscles. Leave a little gap right here because I'm going to write the name of the neurotransmitter. But then below that, skeletal muscles. And do you remember the name of that neurotransmitter that always is found at the neuromuscular junction? It's ACH. And it binds to nicotinic, cholinergic receptors. We call that the neuromuscular junction. Every single skeletal muscle cell in your body has an axon terminal that comes to it. And it releases acetylcholine and then causes that individual muscle fiber to contract. Within a given muscle, you can have all the muscle cells contract if you want to kick a ball really hard, or maybe just a few of them contract. We have really nice control. Okay, then now we're going to move on to the autonomic motor neurons. So where would you find these cell bodies? Well, you would find them in the spinal cord. I'm going to use red. And if you were looking at a cross-section of a spinal cord, where would you find the cell bodies? You would find them in the ventral horn. And specifically at the levels between T1 and L2. It's the only places you find those sympathetic fibers. This is where the cell body would be. This is the only place you would find those cell bodies. Okay, now the cell body has an axon that is usually not myelinated. If it is, it's just a little bit maybe. And so these are slower. And then it comes to a ganglion. A ganglion is a location where there are going to be cell bodies, and that means that this first neuron is going to release acetylcholine. Yes, you heard me right, acetylcholine, onto what's called the postganglionic fiber. So this is a short, actually don't write it there, put it here, a short preganglionic fiber. And then this is the ganglionic cell body. There might be hundreds of these in a ganglion. And then this would be what's called a long postganglionic fiber. To reach the final target. Now the ganglion might be found in the sympathetic trunk. That's called chain ganglia. This is beside the spinal cord. You can actually see it if you want to look at the cadaver in APR, you can see these little swellings where there's a bunch of cell bodies off to the side of the spinal cord. Or they might be found in the abdominal cavity before they go to their final target of, let's say, a GI organ. Okay, then when the postganglionic fiber gets to its final target, it's going to release a different neurotransmitter. Not acetylcholine, but it's going to release a different neurotransmitter that is the mediator of sympathetic action, norepinephrine. And that is going to be released onto adrenergic receptors. I'm not going to be any more specific than that because it could be alpha ones or beta ones, depending on what the target is. So just in general, onto adrenergic receptors. The target could be a cardiac muscle or a smooth muscle. Maybe that smooth muscle is around the intestine. Maybe that smooth muscle is around a gland, so it can squeeze it. Maybe it's around, did I already say the GI tract? Maybe it's around the uterus or the bladder. Maybe it's the ciliary body, right? If it's the ciliary body, think what had to happen. You have a cell body in like T1, let's say, and then it goes and has a synapse right outside. It meets up with another cell in the chain ganglia, and then this long postganglionic fiber goes all the way up the neck to release norepinephrine onto the smooth muscle, the ciliary body, to cause dilation of the pupil and flattening of the lens. So that's just one of, all the many different jobs. Okay, then we'll look at the parasympathetic. In this case, again, there's not going to be much myelination. We're using a green pen. So these cell bodies are either found in the brainstem, like the cranial nerves, or there are also some that come off the bottom of the spinal cord, and they're called sacral nerves. So at the very bottom of the spinal cord, and just right outside of it, are some cell bodies that fire down to eventually to their target and release acetylcholine and have parasympathetic effects. Okay, and there's not going to be much myelination. And then notice that it has a long preganglionic fiber. And its ganglion is on the target, or at least very near it. So in the case of the ciliary muscle, the third cranial nerve has cell bodies, in the brainstem, and then they fire their action potential to this ganglion that is located essentially right behind the eyeball. And then it releases acetylcholine, and then the next cell body fires its action potential onto the actual target, where acetylcholine is released onto different kinds of cholinergic receptors. And those could be on cardiac muscle, in which case it would slow the heart down, or smooth muscle. In the case of the ciliary body, it will contract it. In the case of the GI tract, it will cause more peristalsis, more movement of the food through.